SECfans.com, week 13, which is also known as Rivalry Week, and which is known in the SEC, I guess, week after Cupcake Week, whatever. We had fun talking about that last week and on our live show. There's a 2-hour live show out there if y'all want to listen to us talk about some college football that'll kind of not expire. Most of our videos expire after the week's over because we do preview shows. This is more of a general college football discussion, so if you're bored and you want 2 hours to kill, there's 2 hours of audio on the website in kind of podcast version, or you can catch it on YouTube as well. I just want to remind you, as usual, please, guys, subscribe if you haven't already. Alabama fans and Auburn fans are pretty familiar with us. We're going to do, I think, 5 games this week, Josh, all on big-time rivalries. Also wanted to mention to y'all a little project. It's kind of a pet project of mine. I'm a software engineer by trade, so I tend to do some, just fun stuff, sometimes college football related on the side, just for my own fun time. And so I built a little website. I found an open source NFL database, and I've always wanted to have at the ready some statistics based on my favorite college teams. So the website is profootballdataproject.com. I'll link it in the description. And basically all it is you search by your favorite college football team, and it prints out the NFL roster and their statistics, relative statistics, either for the week, for the season, or you can click on an individual player and see their season results. It's really as simple as that, super easy. Just thought you guys might like it as much as I do when I'm following college football teams, SEC teams, and want to know how they're doing week to week. I check it out, profootballdataproject.com. All right, and by the way, that's not monetized. It's not an advertisement. It's just a fun project for me that's not even ready. It's super ugly, but I wanted to share it with y'all. All right, Josh, enough of that. We're going to get into Alabama and Auburn real fast. We tend to talk long about these, but I think because we've done so much with both of these teams all year, we can maybe kind of get in and get out with this discussion. Auburn not having the season that we maybe hoped they would when we discussed them in the beginning of the season. One of the main reasons we said, starting off, our biggest worry was the running game. It has seemed to come to fruition that the run game has been hit or miss. It hasn't. It's kind of stepped up at times and then faded back a little bit. And I think we saw it kind of show against A&M that maybe Auburn didn't have to have the running game to beat everybody, but they did have to have it to have the consistency on offense to beat a team like Georgia. However, and I know there's a lot of factors involved with this for Alabama, but they were humming on offense, just clicking, bam, bam, bam. And then Tua got a little bit of a knee injury, and then they hit sort of that defensive meat of their schedule with LSU and Mississippi State. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how if we saw an LSU or a Miss State team slow Alabama down to the 20s, and we've talked about how Auburn has a good defense. Maybe talk a little bit about the matchups and how Auburn compares to LSU and Mississippi State, and can they do some things that those two defenses did to maybe give Auburn a chance in this one as well?
So I think the biggest thing that really impacted Alabama in both those games was the inability for Tua to have as long as he needed to be able to execute the play at a high level. And I guess if you're an Auburn fan, I assume you've probably seen a lot of Alabama football this year. At this point, if you don't respect what Tagovailoa is able to do as a passer, I don't think there's much I can do to convince you. He's extremely effective when he has time to throw. He's very, very accurate. Neither one of us have thought he was nearly as effective since he suffered his knee injury or around that Tennessee-Missouri game. And when we say that, it's not just relative to who he is in terms of statistical yard per attempt stuff. I'm talking about his ability to put the ball on the money consistently, play in and play out. There were a lot of plays early in the season, like the Louisville in the opener, and then especially like the Ole Miss game. He was hitting throws with the accuracy and timing such that those throws would have been completed no matter what the coverage was. It could have been playing in the NFL, and those throws still would have been completed because the balls were absolutely put on the money 30 yards downfield. However, he hasn't been that accurate lately. He's still very accurate, but I don't think he's quite on the same level as he was then. Two, none of that really matters if he isn't able to throw the ball when he wants to throw it. And the thing that LSU and Mississippi State did is they took away the timing. I think LSU, their pass rush is not phenomenal, right? So LSU in the SEC is a pretty average pass rush. They're seventh in the conference, about dead even in sacks against FBS competition. But what they were able to do was their secondary was able to jam the Alabama receiving core, which admittedly was quite banged up in that game. They didn't have all the starters. An important thing when you talk about starters versus backups, especially when you have, Alabama's basically rolling out all sophomores with a lot of experience to that point. Those are guys that are usually a lot better able to get off jams. And the biggest thing that receivers struggle with, like Alabama has a guy Waddle, that's an exceptionally talented kid as a freshman. But true freshmen in college struggle to get off jams. They're not used to the level of physicality by any means that you see from college quarterbacks. And also, it's a little bit about having your route stemmed and whatnot. LSU was able to greatly disrupt that kind of thing. They had a big impact on a lot of. There were a few plays I remember with Waddle in particular. I think another kid, Shavers, who is one of their backups. They got thrown off their route a lot. And then they were able to get enough pressure on Tua that the receiver isn't where he's supposed to be, the timing isn't what it's supposed to be, and they're not able to execute the throw. However, all that said, I think the real, even better comparison for Auburn is probably not LSU, it's probably Mississippi State. And the reason for that is disruption. Auburn is second in the SEC in sacks against FBS teams only. Mississippi State is fifth. As good as Mississippi State's pass rush is and has been, Auburn has more sacks than Mississippi State. And similarly, Auburn has more tackles for loss than Mississippi State. They're third, and Mississippi State is fifth in tackles for loss. So what Auburn's been able to do is able to generate pressure. They've generated more pressure than Mississippi State has, which I think is a greatly underrated thing. Everybody talks about Simmons and Sweat and Green at Mississippi State and how awesome they are, and they are excellent football players. Auburn's defense, particularly Nick Coe and what he's been able to produce, has something to say about that. And I think my personal view on where Auburn's strengths and weaknesses lie, it's really the fact that Auburn's secondary is good. They're not great, in my opinion. We've talked about a couple times on this because we flagged it in the A&M game. Auburn has no 247 top 250 players in the secondary. They're good guys, like Dean and Davis are experienced. Thomas and Denson are 3-star players that are playing at a good level. Kevin Steele has them understanding the system. Igbenogany is definitely the most talented player, I think. He's speed is on a different level than the other guys, in my view. But he doesn't really know how to play corner yet. He's a converted wide receiver, and it shows. What's kept Auburn from being exposed for the most part, exposed to the extent that these guys maybe aren't elite, is the fact that the pass rush has been so good. And I think it's telling that the defensive statistics, if I look at percentage of opponent averages allowed, Auburn versus Mississippi State, Auburn's allowing 83% of opponent passing averages. Mississippi State right now is allowing 70. Why is Mississippi State so much farther ahead in that category, even though they get less pressure actually than Auburn does? It's because Mississippi State's secondary, in my opinion, is a good deal better. And even though Auburn gets more pressure, they're really having to compensate for the back seven. Most of the time it works. But it's to me similar to Mississippi State, but without the back seven that's quite as good. And that's why I think LSU is kind of the exact opposite problem. Not a good pass rush team, and excellent secondary. You're not going to get the Alabama receivers off their marks. I think they're going to struggle a little bit down the field with a deep ball. But the whole key is, can they disrupt Tua so that they can artificially, get him to throw the ball sooner than he wants? Because unlike LSU, where with LSU he had the time to throw when he wanted to throw, but the receiver wasn't there. With Auburn, just like Mississippi State, the goal is going to be make him throw it before the receiver gets to where he's supposed to get, because you're a lot less likely to be able to disrupt that timing in the route.
In the live show, we talked a little bit about Auburn, and offensively, I had this kind of theory that Auburn is really good for the first couple of drives because those are their scripted drives, and then either they have to go off script and react to what the defense is actually doing, or the defenses seem to adjust pretty well to what Auburn is doing, because it feels like a lot of their points, the A&M game aside, are front loaded in that first quarter, first few possessions, and it seems like teams adjust. On the other side, it feels like, and this is not a numbers based thing, other than the fact that the scores have been lower, but it feels like to me that Coach Locke there in Tuscaloosa is not doing a great job of calling a game that reacts to what the defenses are throwing at him, especially since Tennessee. And in the Tennessee game, what we saw, this was the last game that we saw a team drop 7 or 8, send 3 or 4 consistently throughout the game, and have Tua just pick them apart like crazy. After that, it's been... you can go back and watch the LSU game. I think they sent 6 on all but 2 plays that Tua was in the game. And it really disrupted him. It disrupted timing. But there was never that opportunity, or there was that opportunity. There's never that time where they took advantage of an over-aggressive, send everybody kind of defense, which does 2 things. If you're not neutralizing that, it's also stopping your run game pretty heavily. So same thing happened in Mississippi State. So is it just that these teams finally have some tape on this offense and Tua, and it's going to be a significantly slower kind of offense? Or is it that Coach Loxley isn't reacting and doing a good job of exploiting these blitzes and hitting them with quick hitters or whatever? What have you seen with the and finally, there's another option. These are just better defenses. What do you think?
So personally, I think it's a combination of different factors. One, and I know I agree with you on this, I don't think he's done a great job of dealing with pressures. Early in the game, we saw Alabama was struggling with the Citadel, and we start looking at that game to figure out what's going on. And the thing both of us flagged in that game is the Citadel was bringing 7 or 8, not 8 in the box. They were bringing 7 or 8 on every play. They were bringing everybody they could. And they were basically daring Alabama to either throw over the top, which they had their corners playing way off, or run some sort of screen. And for whatever reason, Alabama didn't do it. They kept running into the teeth of the defense, at least early in that game. Personal opinion with that, I think it's pretty easy to say Alabama may have gone into that game, deciding, especially with knowing Saban, that they were going to establish the run and try to have these certain boxes they wanted to check off of what they wanted to do on offense. And they realized that given how Citadel was playing them, it really wasn't ideal. And they never really went to the screen game the way they should have, given those sort of looks. And then later in the game, they did open up the offense. They started throwing it a lot more than they ran it, and all of a sudden they put up 50 points. 40-point second half, 10-point first half. With LSU and Mississippi State, it's a lot more complicated. I think, you talked about pressure. Mississippi State brought a lot of pressure, but Mississippi State was also able to generate a good amount of pressure bringing 4. And that causes a lot more problems. LSU brought more heat. I think they blitzed a lot more than Mississippi State did. Not to say that Mississippi State didn't blitz, but LSU, and this is true of Aranda in general, LSU is more reliant on the blitz as a tool. So I think that was, I think that was probably the game where you should have seen more of a screen package. But the flip side, the problem with the LSU game is that Alabama actually moved the ball very well in that game. They had over 500 yards of offense. It's kind of amazing, really, that they only had 29 points, given how effective their offensive production was, particularly running the football. And a lot of that was because when you blitz and miss on the run, it tends to go for big plays. And something you've seen a lot with Alabama the past few games is Alabama's had a lot of big chunk run plays and a lot of stuffs. And that's it. When you see that almost always means you have a lot of inside blitzes, because when those hit home, if you pick the right gap, you're going to stuff the run. If you pick the wrong gap, you're going to give a long play. So if you're Auburn in this game, if I'm Auburn, I want to probably gear more towards the Mississippi State model. You do want to bring pressure. You want to force early throws, but you don't want to do it constantly. I think Auburn has the players, like Big Cat Bryant or Nick Coe, Derek Brown. They can get pressure without having to bring too many guys. And I don't know that they're going to get a ton of pressure because Alabama's offensive line is very good. They're going to be a lot more motivated. And to be fair, LSU didn't get a ton of pressure. Mississippi State did, but also Tua was kind of a sitting duck in that game, and I just don't think Alabama played very well. I think if you do that, you can sort of pull off the screen game a little. You can contain the screen game because you have your linebackers back and play it a little more fairly. But I definitely think there's something to be said that Alabama has not reacted well to the blitz. They have not, and I say reacted well in terms of played around it. And I think one last point I'll make, because both these questions you've given me have long answers that I think are just long. I think one of the big things with Alabama is they're very dependent on the RPO game, and people have film on that. And what they've basically decided is they can't really deal with it straight up. So they've sold out blitzing to try to disrupt timing because they don't really like their chances if they have to hold up against Tua downfield or have to hold up against the run game. I think they would be getting burned a lot more if Alabama was healthier at receiver, because Jerry Jeudy was the slot receiver and they had Henry Ruggs and Devontae Smith on the outside. And in the RPO game, whether it's Smith or Jeudy or who have you, you need somebody willing to go across the middle of the field where the linebacker is vacated on those hot routes, and throw over the blitz in order to be effective. And from what I've seen, the guys they have in there now, if it's Keefe or Waddle or Shavers, those guys have not been willing to go over the middle of the field and haven't been nearly as effective in doing that. That's been a really big factor, I think, in impact on Alabama, because that has prevented them from exploiting the blitz the way they did early in the season, which is the only way to make the blitz stop, because the receivers aren't able to, get themselves open in the middle of the field, or I don't think Tua is delivering the ball with the confidence that he did earlier in getting that ball out and getting to the receivers, probably partly due to chemistry.
So it's interesting that you mention the RPO, because part of that, to me, especially if you want to punish an over aggressive defense, is having a quarterback that can actually keep it in an RPO in more of a, for people who aren't familiar with a full RPO and are more familiar with kind of a zone read concept. If you're running back 5, 10, 12 times in a row, and then you keep it, you can really hurt somebody. With Tua being hurt, do you think that impacted like an entire component of the offense because he wasn't a threat to run? So really they kind of took RPO mostly off the table and sort of played it straight up with him in the pocket?
I do think it impacted it. I'm not 100% sold that it impacted it in terms of like zone read concepts and schematic responsibilities in that way. It probably did to a certain extent, and that's something I'd almost have to watch film exclusively for, because it's so hard to track what is linebacker responsibilities. But yeah, there's probably something there. The fact that in a lot of defensive sets, normally they'd want to have a linebacker accounting for the quarterback and keeping containment. I think the biggest thing is if you're an opposing defense, you have a lot more confidence in bringing in an interior blitz and not worrying about the pocket being rolled. So if Tua is mobile, which he was early in the season, if you bring a really heavy inside blitz, you bring 7 and they're all inside, and Tua rolls outside the pocket, you've essentially left everybody in single man coverage. You're not going to get home because he's going to get outside the pocket and he's going to have time. And now you're trusting corners and safeties to be, even if you have single man safety, you're going to have 2 or 3 guys stuck one-on-one with Alabama's receivers. And that's just asking for trouble. That's begging for a big play, and that's assuming that Tua doesn't scramble for long yardage. That's just saying the fact that he can extend it, and you've strained things. So I think when he's more mobile, the problem is you're a lot more apt to want to keep your safeties back, because if they roll the pocket, you want those safeties up back in coverage. And if he's stuck in the pocket, you have a lot more confidence to bring a safety blitz. You have a lot more confidence to bring linebackers in a blitz. Because you don't have the running back sneaking out of the pot, running back sneaking out on a flare, or the tight end sneaks out on a flare, and he has time to hit that route because he's rolled out. Anytime you bring a heavy blitz, you got one-on-ones. And yeah, I mean, again, perfect example is Irv Smith had one of the highlight plays for Alabama against the Citadel, thrown down the middle of the field. he was wide open on that play. And I haven't gone back and looked at it, but now that you bring it up, I think there's probably a fair chance that they don't have a linebacker assigned to Irv Smith on that play. I don't know if it's a blitz or whatnot, but that's the kind of thing that happens if you let someone extend a play and you bring a heavy blitz. And I think that's the factor that the mobility brings for Alabama, and that's what scares teams and keeps them from being able to bring more pressure.
All right, let's talk Auburn for a little bit. So one of the interesting points that came out of the Liberty game, because it's really hard to glean much from an FCS game, even with Alabama at 10-10 versus the Citadel. It's hard to take much. Both teams kind of started out slow if you watch Auburn versus Liberty. But one of the things, yes, Auburn put up a ton of points, but they still struggled on third down against Liberty, and they really struggled on third down against Georgia. And it seems to me third down and red zone offense are a real problem for Auburn this year. But I want you to talk a little bit about schematically what's going on with Auburn against Georgia. So they put up 10 points. By the way, we didn't get to cover Auburn or talk about that game much, but Auburn only had 10 points in that game. But their touchdown came on the best throw I can remember from a non-quarterback in a trick play situation, because that, usually when you do like a flea flicker or a reverse pass or something crazy where I guess flea flicker wouldn't be the quarterback, would be the quarterback throwing. But anyway, when a running back or a wide receiver is throwing, usually those touchdown passes, the guy's wide open. He threw a dime in pretty decent coverage. So I was really impressed with that. It was their only score. I wanted to talk about it. We didn't get a chance to. Jarrett Stidham threw the ball 36 times in this game. And the running backs ran it for 13 carries. And I know that neither one of them were doing great, but 36 pass attempts from Jarrett Stidham, 102 yards rushing, but 36 of that was from Jarrett Stidham. So he had 42 either passes or runs. And then combine the running backs ran the ball for 13 yards. Is that just a recipe for disaster, not just against Alabama, but for Auburn against any good defense, because it's just not in their DNA at this point?
I think maybe so. We talked about this early in the year that Auburn was almost certainly going to have to throw the ball to be successful. Just due to the personnel and the losses they had, they were going to have to lean more on Stidham. It was something we questioned, how much their offense was going to evolve to the point where they'd have a true, matured passing attack. Obviously, it hasn't worked out the way they would have liked. And I went back, before we had this discussion, and I pulled up our model for the Auburn-Georgia game. We had Auburn predicted to have 3.3 yards per carry and 6 yards per attempt. So if you go back and look at Auburn's statistics, on one hand, it's easy to say Auburn had 5.1 yards per carry, but the reality there is a little weird because Shivers had 30 yards on one carry, and outside that, he had about 4 yards per carry on just 3 other carries. Whitlow only had 26 yards on 9 carries for 2.9 yards per attempt. So the backs had about 3.5 yards per attempt. The difference from our prediction really was the fact that the passing attack was even less effective than we predicted at 4.5 yards per attempt. And again, it's kind of weird because they completed passes and they were 24-36, which is straight 66% passing. It just wasn't for very many yards at all. Ryan Davis was the most targeted guy, but he averaged only 5.5 yards per reception, which is extremely low. And his longest reception of the game was only 10 yards. So they were kind of stuck running a screen game. I think the biggest thing with Auburn really is just the offensive line is not what it needs to be. They can't run the ball up the middle. We've said this all year. Their offense has to work inside out. You've got to be able to run the ball up the middle to keep the linebackers home so that you can run the jet sweep without the linebackers having the edge on you. And then because the linebackers can't have the inside and set the edge, that forces the safeties to walk up to deal with the jet sweep and motions outside. And or the zone read, either one of those things is designed to be a counter to get the edge. And then once the safety step up, then you hit passing game, which is designed to exploit one-on-one opportunities where a corner or a safety is biting on the run and then gets caught letting a guy get behind him. They don't use true route concepts to get somebody open in the sense of that you have like high-low reads and that kind of thing. That's part of a typical passing game. Without the inside run, none of that works. They don't have the inside run this year. It isn't working. They haven't found a counter to that. And what's worse in the passing game is it still isn't the mature passing game it needs to be. Stidham has not been as accurate as he needs to be. So when they have opportunities down the field, they're not connecting them with them on a great, at a great clip. The receiving core is not a mature receiving core or a complete one, I guess I would say. And when I say that, what I mean is Ryan Davis is a very good receiver. I think Seth Williams is showing signs that he will be a very good receiver. Other than that, Anthony Schwartz is a track star that has very good skills as a jet sweep guy. He does not have great downfield ball skills. He's not a great route runner. He's not a great true receiver in my view.
I agree with that.
And it kind of goes basically the entire roster, the rest of the roster is the same way. They've got a lot of speed guys. Again, it's all based off if they have a misstep, you want to have a guy get behind the defense and exploit it on a bomb. That's what Malzahn's system's designed to do. That's what he's recruiting at receiver. These are not guys designed to have a possession catch on a corner route 15 yards downfield.
He's got the right guys. He just doesn't have the right guy. He's got the right guys for the scheme that he should be running. He's not got the right guys at wide receiver for what he's had to run this year.
Exactly. And if they had the inside run game, I think all this stuff would magically fix itself. Stidham would look better. The receivers would look better. The running backs, if the running backs could produce.
So I want to offer a little bit of pushback on what you're saying. And I agree that the offensive line is not there. And I really think they need a couple of running backs. We saw that for a while with Auburn, that they'd have that main guy, but they'd also have somebody else they could bring in that was still reliable. But listen to this. So their other game where they scored around where our model's predicting, hint, hint, 23-9 lost to Mississippi State. So the Georgia game, Stidham threw it 36 times for 4.5 yards per attempt. The Mississippi State game, Stidham threw it 38 times for 5.6 yards per attempt. But Whitlow had 11 yards per carry. Here's the problem. He only ran it 8 times. And it's not like he had 88 yards with a 70-yard carry. He had 88 yards and his long was 40. So he still got another 50 yards on 7 carries. That makes no sense to me. They had 9, 12, 13 carries from their running backs. Both of these games, they're very analogous. So I would argue when you've got a guy running that much, that it's not just that you don't have the offensive line or running that well. It's that he still wants to be this pass happy offense, and either he's doing what Georgia did against LSU and he's panicking, or he's going into the game thinking we're going to throw it 30-plus times regardless of what the running back does. So I agree. I think there are some personnel issues, but I also think there's some scheme issues, maybe some panic issues.
I don't disagree with that. I think that's a fair take. And so, like you said, we weren't too far off of that one. So 23-9, the result, we had this one almost the exact opposite, right? So 31-12 Auburn over Mississippi State. Why was that weird? And I note, by the way, we did not pick Auburn to win that game 31-12. We kind of noted at the time that model was way off. That game in particular, I agree with you. It's Auburn is not sticking with what they need to do to run their offense. Whitlow had 11 yards per carry in that game against Mississippi State. And to only have the ball 8 times and you throw 38 with that kind of yardage is nuts, just flat nuts. And it's not like they gave the ball to anybody else, right? I mean, Martin had 4 carries, was totally ineffective, has not really been effective all year, to be honest, against better teams. And then you've got a lot of one-offs, Willis, Martin, Schwartz, Shivers, all getting a carry. I think Auburn has an identity problem. They can't decide what they want to be. I think they went into the season trying to be a pass-happy team. They were, to a certain extent, that kind of team, I believe, against Washington. And so I'll pull this up See if I'm crazy on that. Uh,
And while you're talking about this, I also want you to address, because it relates to scheme, if you buy into the notion that running backs need to be fed the ball to get carries to get into a rhythm, or if that's just an old adage that old tough football dudes like to say, and it's not really a thing.
Yeah. So first, I'm not crazy. Stidham had 36 attempts and 11 rushes. So I like to combine quarterback carries and rushes because to me it's more about are your backs getting the ball as much as the quarterback's getting the ball. 47 touches for Stidham, 22 for Cam Martin, who's the lead back, 8 for Whitlow. So you're still getting about 50% more touches to your quarterback than you are your running backs. Um, Again, it was definitely skewing towards a pass heavy offense, which in that game, 7.6 yards per attempt is fine. But to your point, I do think running the ball is about wearing a defense out to a large extent. It's about imposing your will physically, sure. Most teams don't run the ball at a great clip at the beginning of the game. If you watch Clemson this year, they have struggled in the first quarter repeatedly. And the reason is they have basically leveraged their whole season off dominating the line of scrimmage and using ETN to have gaudy rushing statistics. And it's later in this year, the games when teams get kind of tired and worn out that they've been able to do that and leverage that for, to be able to win ball games. I don't know that Auburn has relied on the run enough to sort of establish the offense. It's the same problem. We talked about this with Georgia and LSU, that Georgia panicked, felt like they weren't scoring enough and started throwing it constantly. Their run game was quite effective in that game. And I think that would have been a very close game. I don't know if Georgia would have won, but it should have been a close game if Georgia had decided to run the ball. And I think that's consistent with how Georgia, for example, how Georgia played Auburn versus how LSU played Auburn. That Georgia was a better team than they showed that day because they panicked. I do think Gus panics. Gus gets in a mode where Malzahn feels like he's got to score now. He's got to get points. It starts to really eat at him, and he starts calling plays to get the offense going. And he's just not willing to be patient with the offense. Keep running the ball. If nothing else, lull the other team to sleep so that you have some options in the passing game. He tries to force the issue, and that it's not like you'd score a ton anyway, but it makes the bad situation worse to where you end up, like the Mississippi State game, a game where, and our model is saying you go into that and Auburn should have been expected to win that game by a significant margin, and you end up losing 23-9.
All right. So speaking of the model, why don't you go ahead and kind of get us into the numbers, and we'll take it from there.
Right. So, I'm I criticize myself there with the model. I'll give myself a little bit of defense. The Auburn Mississippi State game, that was only 4 weeks worth of data, so we kind of knew at that point the model was not going to be very accurate. Last week it had Georgia 31, Auburn 22, so that maybe a little bit more on pace, but still been favoring Auburn a little bit. This week, not so close. Alabama is the best team in college football at the moment. They allow 68% of opponent rush averages. They allow 75% of opponent passing averages. That is really, it's of all the teams you're modeling right now, only Mississippi State's pass defense is better than Alabama's. Only Clemson's rush defense is better than Alabama's. And those are pretty high marks. Anything under 75% is elite in run D. Anything under 80% in pass D is elite. They're excellent. Any glitches they had early have kind of gone. Auburn's defense, we've talked about this a lot this year, is not statistically that dominant. In fact, it's statistically just above average now. Auburn is allowing 90% of opponent rushing averages. As a team against FBS teams, they're allowing almost 4 yards per carry. And then passing 6.6 yards per attempt sounds pretty good, but it's still 83% of opponent passing averages. That's a good mark, 83%. It's not, to be elite, you'd be below 80, but that's still very good. Definitely relying more on their pass defense. And as I said, I think that's more due to pressure than anything. And the reason I say that, if you go back and you look at Auburn's games, which I'm going to try to do off the cuff right here and look at their passing statistics, I can already tell you what you're going to see is that when they played teams that could protect the passer and throw the ball. Tennessee, 10.3 yards per attempt. Georgia, 9.3 yards per attempt. They got torched a little bit, basically, when teams were able to target the secondary. Washington, same boat, 9.3 yards per attempt. And when they played teams where the pass rush was able to get home and really affect the quarterback, A&M, Ole Miss, Arkansas, Southern Miss, they held teams to under 5 yards per attempt or under 7. So none of those teams were effective passing the ball, kind of one or the other. And what this model essentially comes around and says is Alabama is good enough that the pass rush, given the quality of Alabama's quarterback play and offensive line play, should not be able to just stop Alabama's offense. It's not going to be able to disrupt it to the point of being non-functional. They are going to be able to throw the ball down the field. Moreover, Alabama is going to be able to run the ball quite effectively, which should be a problem. It predicts Alabama to have 4.7 yards per carry and 9.8 yards per attempt. That per attempt number is gaudy, but it's not in any way unreasonable. That's just slightly more than Georgia averaged in that game. Alabama is a better passing offense than Georgia, albeit the injury situation has kind of made that hard to judge week to week, but that's pretty fair. On the flip side, again, this is probably the best run defense that Auburn will have faced. And 2.66 yards per carry is not going to get it done. And then in the passing game, 5.4 yards per attempt. That's also not going to get it done. You want about 7.5 yards per attempt to be effective. So Alabama has a predicted 7.1 yard per play to 3.8 yard per play edge, almost doubling up Auburn in yardage. And unsurprisingly, that leads to a 42-16 predicted win for the Crimson Tide. I think the line on this game, I think I saw it earlier today that it came 24. Out to 24. Our model is putting it at 26. So
and we run these before any lines come out.
Right. And obviously we don't factor the Vegas line into it at all. It just usually works out where our model late in the season, once we have real data, unlike that Mississippi State game, usually comes out within a few points of the Vegas line. Here it's saying the Vegas line's maybe even a little bit too low.
All right, so I'm torn a little bit on this score because on one hand, our model has been really good with Alabama this year and has predicted blowouts pretty well this year for Alabama. It's been a little screwy for a lot of teams because college football is just a little screwy this year. But here's something that's interesting to me. So Georgia had 9.3 yards per attempt and 6.6 yards per carry. Gaudy numbers, almost right on what we're predicting, our model's predicting Alabama to get. And they only scored 27 points. Now, do we think that the gap here between 42 and 27 for basically the same yards per play says more about it is right. Let's say that score is right, and it's saying more about Alabama being far more efficient in scoring relative to yards per play than Georgia, or it's potentially wrong and it's underselling Auburn's defense where they're doing something in a bend but don't break fashion.
I think I would argue in this case that it's really saying that Alabama will be more efficient scoring than Georgia was. Georgia had over 500 yards of offense in that game. I mean, about 516 yards of offense, and they only put up 27 points. That's unusual. Auburn gave up under 5.5 yards per play to A&M. They scored 24. 5.8 yards per play to Tennessee. They scored 30. So what Georgia did, I don't know if it was maybe an issue with Georgia. It's a combination of other factors in the way that game went. They did turn the ball over, but only once. I think it was just a bit of an odd result that it came out the way it did. And I don't think that's necessarily something that gets repeated, though I note Alabama only scored 29 against LSU with over 500 yards of offense. Just like in that game, it's a little bit unusual. And when you have over 500 yards of offense, you're usually going to score over 30 points. I think what's kind of interesting and maybe a little bit notable about this, our model 42-16 almost mirrors the 2011 Alabama-Auburn game exactly. That game was 42-14. Statistically, it's predicting a game that's very similar. Auburn had the same record, 7-5. Alabama was 11-1. Obviously, won the national title that year. That's pretty much what this model is saying, is that this is 2011 Alabama-Auburn redux, and it does not think this game is going to be close in any way. Probably a lot more lopsided, probably than a lot of people would predict.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get my score on this. I'm kind of going back and forth on this because the Georgia game is so recent, and I think it's weighing on me a little bit. 27 points, but I also think that they saw early that Auburn wasn't going to be able to score very much. But if you look at Georgia's other games, they've got a lot more points relative to yardage. And so I don't know. I really don't know what's going on there. But I think back to the Alabama game versus LSU. And, Tua got hurt on that first drive. So that was basically a wasted series. And they shut it down. If they don't shut this game down, I can see them getting into the 40s pretty comfortably. But that means in my mind that Auburn's scoring in the mid 20s, which I don't see happening. So because of that, I think Alabama's actually going to score less. I'm going to go 40-17 Alabama. And so not quite the 42 that the model's suggesting. And I think one of those touchdowns comes late. So I think it's like a 33-10 type game going into the fourth quarter. 40-17 is my pick. What do you think?
I have it a little lower scoring than you. I mentioned the issues Alabama's had with the pass rush and the fact that Auburn resembles Mississippi State in that regard. I think the mobility of Tua not having the knee brace is going to be a boon for Alabama. I still think the ability to disrupt Tua is the only way you're going to stop this Alabama offense. And I don't know where Alabama's receiving core is at in terms of health. And from what little we saw in the Citadel game, both of us tried to flip on and see where Devontae Smith was, uh, trying to predict out this game, and it looked to both of us like he's still, maybe 65%. He's not nearly 100%.
And Damian Harris might not play. I mean,
Right.
he had what looked to be a wicked concussion. I mean, obviously a lot can change in a week, but Damian Harris is out. They're banged up on the offensive line. So
Yeah, yeah, I'm with you. The problem is I don't think Auburn's going to score. I just don't. So I have this 37-6. It wouldn't shock me if it's lower scoring than that, but if the score goes down, it's going to go down probably on both sides. If Alabama's in the 20s, I don't know that Auburn's going to score much. LSU just shut down. Alabama just shut down LSU, and they shut down Mississippi State. I don't know that Auburn's offense is any better than either one of those teams. I think it's Alabama scores a little bit more because their ability to roll the pocket with Tua, his ability to move at all, is going to let them deal with pressure a lot better. And they are at least getting healthier at wide receiver, even without Harris. But yeah, I don't think this game is going to be particularly close, and I do think they're probably going to cover.
I I do think Auburn has a better quarterback than either of these two teams. And Fitzgerald's playing good of late, but we've seen bad Fitzgerald like we saw bad Bo Wallace years ago. He's had some games this year that were just absolute stinkers, and he wasn't throwing anything on Alabama. The Stidham of all three teams, LSU, Mississippi State, and Auburn. Auburn's the only team that has a quarterback that could potentially, he won't probably, but could potentially catch fire against Alabama.
I agree with that, but as I've said all year, I honestly think you're going to do better trying to run the ball against this Alabama defense and throw it. I think you can run the ball some, and when Mississippi State and LSU had success, they had success running the ball. Mississippi State broke a big play running the ball. And LSU moved the ball a little bit through the air, but also on the ground with Brissett, sort of a similar deal. Auburn is not. I don't think Auburn is as good at running the ball as either one of those teams. And if you can't run the ball at all on Alabama, especially given the fact, as we talked about, you don't really have the receivers for a downfield passing attack, I just don't see how they're going to move the ball in this game.
So we try to avoid transitive property when it's like a single one-off sort of thing. But if you look at common opponent games, because there's a handful between Alabama and Auburn this year, is the fact that Alabama's just dump trucked all of them, and Auburn's either lost or struggled with all of them. Is that really, at the end of the day, with all the analysis we do, is that your answer right there in terms of how this game's going to go?
To a large extent. It's the same problem everyone who's played Alabama has, which is that Alabama's just on a different level. And it's not a shot against Auburn, who's, I still think, and I've held for several weeks, Auburn is an underrated football team. They are a pretty good football team. They had a bad day against Tennessee. And I will note, against a Tennessee team that more than anything is just inconsistent with Garantano and has a very good receiving core that was kind of able to uniquely exploit Auburn's secondary for the problems I mentioned earlier, and a quarterback that is just very hot and cold. Outside that, Auburn's had a good season. I mean,
Yeah,
they lost
I don't,
close.
just to interject, because there's another one. Auburn would say they had a bad day against Mississippi State. I think Mississippi State is better than they're getting credit for, too.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I guess what I'm saying is a lot of people seem to dismiss Mississippi State as a top 15 caliber team. I don't at all. I think Mississippi State is probably badly underrated nationally. I think the entire SEC is badly underrated nationally. If you buy that LSU is actually a top 10 caliber team, you need to sort of break in your mind this idea that Auburn's a terrible team because they lost at the end of the game on a field goal in a game that they should, by most metrics, had a 7 out of 8 chance of winning against LSU. That shows that they were good, not that they were bad. They lost to a Mississippi State game in a little bit of a weird game, but a game like we talked about, they kind of panicked a little bit, and I think Mississippi State was very good and in general and very well built to be able to stop them because of the amount of pressure they're able to generate. Kind of, if you break a team's offensive line, then you can kind of control the game and they have no chance, and that's what happened. Georgia is a very, very good football team, but Auburn beating Washington is a big accomplishment. Beating Texas A&M is a big accomplishment. They handled Arkansas ably. They handled Ole Miss fine. They went out and handled business against Liberty. I still think they're a very good football team. I think they're just in an incredibly difficult conference this year, and I think the SEC is just a lot better than it has been in several years, and it's causing everybody to sort of take things the wrong way.
Your point about Washington is a good one, because Washington is 5 points away from only having the Auburn loss. Right now, they're 6-2 in conference. They are literally 5 points away from being 8-0. They lost 12-10 to Cal and 30-27 to Oregon. Auburn in the ACC is second place this year. Auburn might win the Pac-12. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. And we had a shout out to Pete Hogg, who's actually a Washington fan that interacted with us on Twitter, and posted some really good statistics on that. I mean, Auburn would be the clear number 2 in the ACC, clear number 2. And if they had that schedule, you're probably looking at an 11. If Auburn had, let's say, Boston College's schedule, they'd be 11-1 right now, and ranked really high. They're going to be 7-4, and we predict 7-5 purely because they're in the SEC. And probably, assuming I think this may be the year they finally break that bowl streak that they've had of poor performances, because they're going to get matched up with a team that's just not going to be in their league.
Yeah, you mentioned those metrics from that Auburn fan who's actually shown he's helped us out a lot in the and
Washington fan now.
Yeah, I'll link his Twitter in our description, because he's done some great work in metrics, and we get a lot of flack from Big Ten fans who are just so obsessed with the SEC. And somebody kept saying, if you just take Alabama out of the SEC, then they're just an average conference. And then somebody said, well, if you take Alabama and Georgia out of the SEC, they're just an average conference. And I'm like, well, crap, if you take the top 2 teams out of any conference, then what is that conference? Well, he ran the numbers and took Alabama and Georgia out. So the SEC with 12 teams was still number 1 by all objective metrics, not Homer metrics or eye test metrics. These are like same computers that Bill Connolly's using, that old BCS formulas used to use. Objective metrics without Alabama and Georgia still has the SEC as the toughest conference in the country. So that really is in line with your Auburn view, and sort of supports the notion that they're going to be over their opponent they get in their bowl game will be misrepresented in terms of ranking relative to Auburn's.
Right. Yeah. So it there's a lot of SEC teams this year that view this year as a disappointing year. And I don't know, I think a lot of Auburn fans probably do feel that way, but Mississippi State is a 4-loss team right now, and they're a really freaking good football team. and it's just a brutal year in the conference. But if we're right, they're going to come out and handle business in the bowls, and I don't know how much of a consolation that'll be. But at the end of the day, we talk about this bag of wins concept. The SEC always has to go 500 against itself, whether it's good, great, terrible. It's always going to go 500 against itself. This year, everybody was pretty darn good, and a lot of 4-4 records in conference play just kind of beat up on everybody.
It is funny that the Big Ten fans blast for rankings bias the fact that Mississippi State is still in the top 25 with 4 losses, even though Northwestern is ranked ahead of them with 4 losses, and 2 of their losses were to Akron and Duke in a blowout loss. So just putting that out there. You got anything else for Alabama-Auburn before we move on?
I don't think so. Obviously we'll do Alabama-Georgia in the SEC championship game, but I think that's more than enough for the Iron Bowl.
All right, y'all. Thanks so much for sticking with us all the way through to rivalry week. That is so hard to say. That's why they made a commercial about it. Alabama-Auburn is always fun. Got a little bit of deflated this year because of Auburn sort of flagging down the stretch, but it's still an important game to both fan bases, so we wanted to talk about it. And for you Auburn fans, maybe tell us in the comments where we're wrong and how Auburn's going to change things around versus Alabama and our predictions are way off. That'd be great for you to let us know, back it up with data, and we will engage you in the comments. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week, and God bless.